So a fun fact, ChatGPT does not do PowerPoint presentations. I've been conceptualizing this talk for 3 months since Michael and I first had our conversation about this. However, didn't make it a PowerPoint reality until this morning when I woke up with a light hangover after a flight in, thinking, okay, like I need to put this on paper. Let's make this a presentation. So the first thing I went to was OpenAI website and tried to make it a reality. And for all the good that it does, we're not quite there from a PowerPoint presentation perspective. So there's definitely some work to do. Quick show of hands, who likes the idea of becoming a CISO? Less than I thought. Yeah, you're probably a few smarter people in this room. Anyone thought about how they're going to get there? Show of hands if you've thought about it. Okay, cool. I think there is a romanticism about taking the top job, and a lot of people think that it's a fairly linear path to get there. Something that I've realized after working in the space that I'm in is there is no straight line, and the goalposts are continually moving. So put this presentation together that doesn't seem to want to work anymore. There we go. Put this presentation together to really kind of think about, from a reverse engineering standpoint, where you're at today and how to get to that top job. So who is Stuart Mitchell? I have a 50-slide PowerPoint presentation that I discussed with my therapist on a completely different note, but essentially, I run a cybersecurity search firm. I've been working in the recruiting space in the US for 10 years. I think why that number's relevant is the people that I spoke to 5-10 years ago now are the people who have made that journey from SOC analysts, from junior engineers, and I now look around around their room, and they've made that jump, and now they're running programs for some of the most interesting companies on the planet. Grateful to have had the opportunity to work with some of the best companies in the US and around the world. I've helped build cybersecurity teams, OpenAI in their early days, Reddit, Rivian, MasterCard, and plenty of others. So I've seen some of the common trends that people tend to look for when it comes to hiring security leaders. Some very strange commonalities, but also some, very different backgrounds. As an example, one of the highest security executives at ServiceNow trained to be an executive chef. One of the highest security executives at Sony Media was a trained actor. Now, I will say, leopards don't lose their spots, and don't go out to dinner with an executive trained chef. It is one of the most embarrassing things that you can do if you don't know how to eat cordially, but his expertise now is in the cybersecurity space. So, just because you come from a background that might not be typical doesn't mean that there isn't a pathway to get to that job, whether it's a CISO or whatever that journey that you want to go on is. So I think it's an easy thing to say, but start with the end in mind. This graphic is fantastic. Let's go backwards. Okay, that doesn't want to work. Essentially, start with the end in mind. When you're reverse engineering a situation, you look at where you're at, which is, hey, today I am a security engineer, a SOC analyst, a GRC manager, whatever it may be. What am I doing and how do I need to get there? And I think I wanted to make clear, there are other examples rather than just, hey, I want to be a CISO. There were probably a few less hands than I expected to be shown. But whether that's a head of research, whether that's a CEO, whether that's a VP or a director, start with that in mind. And then it's really easy to understand, okay, what are my knowledge gaps? What are my experience gaps? And how can I get there? And I think the biggest thing to realize is this is probably a non-linear path, because what's relevant and what's important today, if you draw a path of your next 5 years, like if we look back, and we'll dive into this in a bit more detail, but if we look at what was relevant in cybersecurity 5 years ago, we've probably blown past that now. So if you create a linear pathway and 5 years ago, you've just started your shift left journey, or you've just started creating a proactive detection and response model, you may find yourself behind. So I think having an end goal in mind, but knowing that the path isn't straight, is something that's super important. I think starting to identify the skills gap is important. So how do you do that, right? It's knowing where you need to get to is great, but how do you identify that? So I think early in your career, I think it's important to find role models, mentors, people that you would quite like to be. Again, doesn't have to be linear. On year one, it could be somebody. Year three, it could be somebody else. But compare your experiences to where they were and what they did to get there. There's also comparing that skill set to job listings of your target roles. Again, using the CISO as an example, hey, I don't have X experience, whether that's a technical skill set, whether that's a managerial skill set, whether that's a industry as an example. That's something that you have to work towards. So, I think it's important for you to understand that and to chase that and to use that as a framework. Talk to recruiters. I know we can be hit or miss, but if you find knowledgeable folks in your field and you can find somebody who is honest and has been in this space for a long time, they can give you a roadmap. They can tell you, classes that you need to take, or certifications to follow, or somebody to be mentored by. They can give you that. And look, where possible, and I know this is difficult, but apply an interview to roles that maybe aren't who you are today, but who you want to be tomorrow. Worst case, you get an interview, and best case, who knows? Maybe you do the Richard Branson thing, right? Maybe you get the job you want and you figure it out on the fly. I don't think there's too much to lose for kind of shooting for the moon. So understanding that ultimately there are opportunities for you to apply to it. Don't be afraid of the rejection, but definitely put yourself out there. And some examples of skill gaps, you may not have management skills. I think what you can do there is, it isn't easy, and people don't often want to do this anymore, but ask for more responsibility at work. Ask to run the next project. Ask to run the next implementation. Take on more and ask for more. I think sometimes it is something that we forget about, but looking internally for more opportunity is a good way to fast track that. So, other things that you can do from a skills gaps perspective, certifications, look, again, hit and miss. There are certain ones that are more relevant than others. I think from an executive perspective, look, I mentioned undergrad to some extent, once you're in the door, probably not going to play as big of a role. From an executive standpoint, the higher up the chain you go, the more an MBA is actually something worth pursuing. Probably the one most common degree in security executives, I would say. And that's because it becomes a business role, right? You become somebody who's focused on OpEx, focused on CapEx, and play a true role in driving the business forward. So that MBA is probably the one most common educational tool that you can add to your belt that can really push you forward, but that's more specific to an executive. Again, from a technical skill set perspective, there are always ways to learn. Even if you're not getting this opportunity in your workplace, contribute to the open source community, home labs. Again, I say it so many times, but classes, certifications, they are ways that can really move things forward. Never stop building your professional network. There are so many people that shortcut their career by being known. I think it is, I look at folks on LinkedIn and on Twitter and that speak at events and are involved in OWASP and CloudSec and other such communities. If people know you and they know your name, they know your brand, and unfortunately that's probably, from a societal perspective, people are a brand. and that's just where we are nowadays. If people know who you are and they trust a brand. So I think, never stop that networking piece. This is obviously something that everybody here is committed to, given they are, spending their time traveling in to connect with like-minded folks, to learn more about security and tooling and meet new people. It's never going to be a bad thing to know more people in the industry. So I think LinkedIn is a really good way to fast-track that. There is a huge community. Twitter may not be that anymore. Maybe 12 months ago, we see disruption is happening in the social media industry. I know Mastodon has a fairly strong presence, but there are, plenty of opportunities to continue to network and to continue to grow. And if you continue to move that forward, your life becomes a lot easier when you can walk into interviews and shake hands with somebody that you're familiar with or So I think ultimately, the more you do that, the better you set yourself up for success. Staying on top of industry trends, regardless of what you're trying to do and who you're trying to be. If we look at some of the biggest trends that have shifted over the last 5 years, almost every business has some form of cloud presence now. Everybody's talked about shifting left for a number of years, huge emphasis on proactive detection and response, and also a fairly large element of privacy has really played a core component in growing security programs, the US and beyond. Whereas 5 years ago, these are things that were maybe not at the tip of everybody's mind. And, as we continue to move forwards, I think regardless of where you go, the trends that you're going to need to stay on top of is, the role of AI in security is probably going to be the only thing we talk about for however long we're allowed to talk for, before that does the talking for us. API security is something that, we see the growth of these large companies, but it's something that every business is worried about. And, continuous steps forwards in compliance, both the traditional frameworks, but, we see Congress is really pushing, firmer cybersecurity bills. People are going to have to stay on top of this. And from a leadership perspective, if you aren't staying on top of these trends, even if you're the hottest commodity in what you're doing today, if you don't move that forward in 5 years, people will forget about you, and the industry does forget about people who aren't interested in moving that knowledge base forwards. Look, in conclusion, where do you want to get to? What do you need to do to get there? Keep building the network, stay on top of current trends, and just continue to take more responsibility and continue to grow. The more you lean into that, the better you will be, and the shorter this journey is, right? We're hackers at heart. There are plenty of ways to hack your career and move things forward. And these are ones that I've consistently seen regardless of backgrounds, folks coming from the military, folks coming from, comp sci backgrounds, folks coming from network, folks not even coming from IT that have found themselves in very high profile jobs. These are the core things that I've seen at the heart of what they're looking to do. The reality is, it's never the green line, right? It's always the blue line in terms of moving forward. You'll take 10 steps forward, you'll take 15 steps back. But as long as you keep pushing in that direction, there's absolutely every opportunity out there for you to hit that end goal. I think I have plenty of time left, so I'm open to any questions if any folks have any. Go ahead.
Not really a question, but a comment, awesome material. I think the reverse engineering metaphor is perfect for this, because growing your career can be tedious and detailed and boring at sometimes. When you get those breakthroughs, you're like,
yeah.
I'm winning, right? And then you go on to the next problem, and you go on to figuring out the next function or whatever it may be. So, awesome stuff.
Yeah, and I think there's always a mindset of how can I get there quicker, how can I get there faster, and there's no better metaphor, I think, than in cybersecurity, reverse engineering that and getting it. We love instant gratification as well, right? So the sooner we get there, the better. Any other questions? Sure. Yeah, look, I do. I think a direct community or an introduction is great. I think what we probably don't appreciate is people are maybe better than we give credit for. And if you reach out to somebody who you respect or like or would like to be, either directly or by ways of introduction, people are very generous with their time. And I think it's easy to look at somebody, in a high-profile CISO role or a CEO of a company, and people do say yes a lot more than they say no. So I think be pretty direct around it if you can, by ways of introduction, if you know somebody, but reach out, email, shoot a message on LinkedIn. People are nicer than we think. I didn't quite hear that, sorry. That's a good question, right? Because it's not a night and day situation, but I think ultimately, steer into the technical skill set, right? I think if you're a technical person, if you're a technical leader, own a technical program first. Own an engineering program, a security operations program. Lean into that strength. I think if you go all the way, I think it's a very difficult situation. I also think once you do it, maybe some people don't love it and don't want it, but you get to continue to do what you want to do. But I think something that I learned as someone who wasn't initially a people manager that became a people manager is seek outside expertise who maybe aren't relevant to your skill set. So get either, if you can get your company to pay for it, do it. But if you can get a leadership coach, obviously reading is something that we take for granted, but read and understand what type of leader you want to be. I think a lot of that will come from external coaching and from reading, but definitely lean in initially to that technical skill set that can get you to that leadership level. Just one, or how many misconceptions? Look, I think the biggest misconception at the early stage is everybody wants to be a pen tester, and I know you know that, but everybody wants to be a pen tester, and there is so much more to cybersecurity than that. I think there's a couple of other big ones, which is that being a CISO is a great job. I know a lot of CISOs who are constantly stressed, can never really take a vacation. Phone doesn't go off at Thanksgiving. Phone doesn't go off at Christmas because you can never switch off. And so that's another big misconception, is that the top job is the best job. Great. All right, well, thank you, folks.